No, I didn't. So, good morning. Let's see if most people have come inside. Yes. Then we will start. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, very warmly welcome to Europahuset and to this seminar. I'm so happy to see that so many of you have braved the rather horrific weather and come into the warmth for a breakfast seminar. My name is Annika Weppling-Korsnäck. I'm head of the European Commission's representation here in Sweden. And we are here today to discuss and to commemorate that tomorrow, 2 years have passed since the start of the Russian full-scale invasion of Ukraine. It is a sad but an important moment to commemorate. It's sad, of course, because it reminds us about the human suffering and the number of casualties that are also increasing day by day. But it's also important to remind us that a war is still ongoing in the EU neighboring country, and that the support from Sweden and the EU and the rest of the world is as important as it was from the first day. And in this peaceful environment in Stockholm and Europahuset, it is easy to forget about the war and about the large casualties, not only soldiers but also civilians. So I'm very, very glad again to see that many of you are here today and that you find it important to take the time to discuss and commemorate this day. And before we start, I would also like to draw your attention to tomorrow, which is the actual then day on the 24th, and another event that takes place on Sergels Torg, just here around the corner at 3:00 p.m., where it's a manifestation to show that Sweden and the EU is standing behind Ukraine. And many of us will be there, and I hope that you will also come and join us. But today we will talk about the war, the support provided to Ukraine, and the needs that have materialized and are still materializing in the future. EU and its member states have so far committed, let's say so, with a figure of 138 billion euros. That is including the 50 billion that were committed just recently. Of this, it's about 30 billion to military support and around 5.6 billion from the European Peace Facility. But the support is, of course, much wider than that. It's also 4.2 million Ukrainian refugees that are being hosted in an EU country, which has led to the activation and later on also the prolongation of the Temporary Protection Directive. And of course, also a large amount of support is given to humanitarian civilian protection to ensure that children can go to school and that healthcare can continue to function. And I hope that we will also have the time to discuss the broader political relation between the EU and Ukraine and the path to accession that was formally launched by the EU leaders recently. And I'm very, very glad that I have an eminent panel with me today. Andriy Plachotniuk is the ambassador of Ukraine to Sweden. Diana Janse, State Secretary to Minister for International Development Cooperation and Foreign Trade. Etienne de Gonville, sorry, Ambassador to of France to Sweden. And Boris Gerke, Deputy Head of Mission, German Embassy in Sweden. That's a lot of things to think of. So very welcome to all four of you, and I'm happy that you have taken the time to be here. So, Mr. Ambassador Plachotniuk, 2 years have passed since the invasion of your country started, or the full-scale invasion started, we should say. And of course, I understand that it's difficult to summarize any chain of events, but maybe you can give us a few examples of how this war has changed yours and your compatriots' view of yourself, your countries, and the relationships with your neighbors.
Good morning to everyone, dear Annika, dear fellow panelists, excellent, distinguished guests, dear friends. Firstly, tomorrow we will commemorate the second anniversary of full-scale invasion. To give you a brief assessment how this big war changed life of Ukrainians, I would mention three things basically. Firstly, we should understand that this big war has brought atrocity, pain, sufferance and blood to my country and to my compatriots. On the other side, this war and this wartime situation, it has consolidated our society. We have become more united, more resilient, more strong. And in this sense, what is worthwhile mentioning is when it comes to opinion polls for Ukrainians, how they see the future development, the number of people who support EU membership, full membership in EU, in NATO, has grown. And now we have around 90% of people supporting this idea. So it has become our civilizational choice of our future development. The third point, which also is important to understand, is this war situation has also influenced our neighbors, our country neighboring with Ukraine, and definitely the European Union and European Union member states. In this sense, we are definitely grateful to all our partners for hosting Ukrainians during this wartime situation and doing everything possible and impossible to support them, to support Ukrainian children, to support Ukrainian women in your countries, and providing a lot of assistance, which is absolutely vital for them to at least feel some normalities of the previous life in Ukraine. And I would like to express the profound gratitude of the Ukrainian government to all governments of your states for this support to Ukrainians.
Thank you very much. At this moment, what do you feel is the greatest need from that you would wish from the EU and its member states?
If I can mention the political side of this matter, definitely the most important thing is to have unity. Unity is vital for Ukraine when it comes to agreeing and reach an agreement, be it sanctions, be it further financial support of Ukraine, be it ramping up the production of defense equipment. Everything is based on unity. So unity is very important, and we will be happy and we will be working with all our partners to have this unity among all our true friends. Another issue is definitely when it's war, we're talking about weapons, weapons, and weapons. So to win the war, we need weapons. To have more weapons, we need more production in Europe, everywhere. So it's another issue. And definitely to support Ukraine, to support our economy, we need microfinancial support. So this war continues. Our enemy is still very strong. The resources are huge. So we should be prepared to continue our work together at the pace that we have started 2 years before. So we should be united, we should be bold, we should be ambitious in setting goals and reaching them.
Thank you. Ms. Janse, when it comes to Sweden, the Ukraine war has led to maybe the most profound change of the Swedish security policy for the last 200 years, moving away from alliance-free status to maybe today, but very soon, let's say, having an agreement to join NATO. Could you give us a brief run-through of this change and the implications that it means for Sweden?
Yes, and good morning, and thank you for inviting me, and thank you, Ambassador. I think you expressed a profound thanks to Sweden and to Europe for our support, but I think it's we should underline it's us that should thank you and the Ukrainians for fighting for all of us, because what's at stake is really our common values, and what Russia does imposes as a threat to not only to Sweden but to Europe as a whole. So it's really in our interest to support you, to help your country to fight for your freedom and integrity, but because that's also, it's not only a fight for Ukraine, it's a fight for all of us. Yes, as you mentioned, Annika, we have really made a U-turn in certain, to a certain extent, with this NATO application. It's also quite, I mean, and that's really a profound change, of course, and it's inevitable. I think it's the right choice, obviously, and I think it will not only enhance Sweden's security, but it will also make NATO stronger. I think it's also interesting and important to see that we have such a solid support in Parliament for this, for helping Ukraine, including with weapons. So we have 8 parties out of 8 in Parliament profoundly behind this effort from the Swedish side to do whatever we can to support Ukraine. So we do that. I mean, it's a key priority for the government to support Ukraine financially, militarily, politically, judicially, with humanitarian aid, with development cooperation aid. And me, from my side, working specifically on development cooperation issues, we have made quite a few changes in the entire development cooperation policies in order to mobilize support and resources for the Ukrainian cause. Yeah, so it's really a whole of government approach behind the support to Ukraine, and then a whole of government support, so to speak, behind the efforts to join NATO, to ramp up our own security situation, and hence also making NATO stronger. Thank you.
Thank you. Could you just maybe also give us a few examples of some areas where Sweden have kind of prioritized the support, so either the military or the humanitarian?
Yeah, okay. So, well, we have 15 military packages, and as Ambassador pointed out, to win a war you need weapons. So the 15th package that was presented this week amounts to a value of roughly 7.1 billion krona. I think in all the military support is, I mean, in all our support is around 30 billion Swedish krona, 37 billion in total, plus and including the latest package of 7 billion krona. So that included combat boat 90, smaller high-speed motorboats, underwater weapons, artillery ammunition, extremely important at this critical stage, grenade launchers, anti-tank robots, etc. And on the development side, so last summer the government signed off the biggest bilateral cooperation strategy we have ever had. I think this year Swedish development cooperation support will reach 4.4 billion krona. So the bilateral cooperation strategy, even if it's the biggest one, is just a part of a much larger effort to support Ukraine, primarily in supporting Ukraine's EU integration and support the rebuilding and reconstruction of Ukraine. And we're very happy that we're also just been invited as a member of the multi-agency donor coordination platform. So that's a coordination platform of major donors at G7 the G7 countries kicked off a year ago or so, and we have been invited because we're giving such a huge aid. So it's really an effort.
Thank you very much. Mr. Gerke, Germany is also, well, is one of the largest contributors of aid to Ukraine, both when it comes to absolute numbers and GDP, I mean, part of GDP. Would you like to give us a short summary of maybe the development of the political and public support? Because we know that in the beginning, particularly when it came to military support, this was very contested, of course, because it's also changed the historical path of Germany. So please.
Yeah, thank you very much, and good morning to everybody. Thanks a lot for having me. Indeed, it's a broad question. I try to sum it up quickly in the sense of starting with the public opinion, public view in Germany. I would say the developments are very similar to many member states. Not as in Sweden, the public support here is very strong. We just saw the latest polls, so I think you're leading by example. In Germany, we're right now on the public sphere a little bit more on the average, I would say. There are different polls coming out around this second anniversary. And the Munich Security Index, for example, to start on the positive side, is showing clearly that the German public, the broad public, is in support of Ukraine and does not question it. If we look in a little bit into the figures, the large majority sees a danger of further attacks on other countries if Ukraine doesn't defeat Russia. They also say that Europe is not safe if Ukraine loses. So that's the good thing. Let's say the positive thing in the public domain. But as we have to face realities, right? I mean, the support across Europe and Germany too. If you look into specific questions, the public support vanishes a little bit. Just to pick two examples. If we look at the refugees, for example, in Germany, at the beginning there was a very positive mood towards it. Now, 2 years in, we're the biggest, we have about 1.14 million Ukrainian refugees in Germany, but the public opinion also changed. You know, only 25% right now would support coming more refugees to Germany, Ukrainian refugees in this particular sense. Another thing, as you alluded to, the discussion about heavy weapons. In the beginning, there was a majority for it to deliver more heavy weapons to Ukraine. Right now, the majority is shifted. I think we had a very similar discussion as here in Sweden, as we're coming from a pacifistic European-centered political culture, to put it a little bit roughly, and we didn't export into hot crisis areas until then, and that was the first decision, to do it. Again, very similar discussions here in Sweden, for example. So there's a change. And I think that leaves us basically with the task, our politicians, us experts, diplomats, to seek the discussion, to go out to the public. Discussions like this today, thanks a lot for that, but also the anniversary are an opportunity, and try to convince the public what they already know on the broad scope, right? They know that it's not, it's dangerous to lose if Ukraine loses. So, I would also be interested in Diana's take maybe later. What did you do right here to have this high support in the public, for example, compared to Germany? But also moving on, as there were different elements that you were asking for. Looking to the very beginning of the war, it was, of course, not only for Germany, but there was a wide-ranging decisions that had to be taken. Right, the military support was, of course, one of them. But as you all remember, Germany was highly dependent on Russian gas, for example, Russian energy. So that was on the table. We had to get rid of the dependence of Russian energy, trying not to fund the Russian war machine anymore, looking for new energy sources. There was the discussion about sanctions and BRI, so there was a lot on the table. I would also say that it's sometimes forgotten, nevertheless, that we already sent in the very first days, you know, I hope I get the terminology right, but RPGs, there were GDR RPGs, there were howitzers, so Haubitzen, you call it, and in the very early days, so already early spring 22, we had already decisions to deliver the Panzerhaubitze 2000, which is a very modern, very effective tool on the battlefield to deliver. So there are different shades to the discussion back then, but of course I can understand, you know, the Ukrainian soldier standing in the trenches facing the Russian invasion troops couldn't care less about the discussions that we were having in Germany, you know. But you know, shifting to the current time here, I think the political support in Germany, as we have like on the parliamentary and political realm, is very broad. You have broad support for Ukraine. You see it in the numbers that you alluded to. We have some outliers. We have our right-wing AfD guys that are pro-Russian, and we have a new party, the Bündnis Sarah Wagenknecht. She's coming from the left, but has a more restrictive migration policy. They're also more pro-Russian. Having said that, the broad majority in parliament, in the political realm, is very pro-Ukraine, and they're understanding that Russia is a grave danger to European security, as it was already alluded to earlier. So I think there's a broad understanding that Ukraine needs the support of its partners, and Andrei, you and your people can rest assured that Germany will not let you down on that, and we will continue our you know, political, military, financial, humanitarian support to Ukraine. And just to have some figures, let's say, put to that, that is, bilaterally alone, we have contributed 30 billion euros since February 22. We just signed as a second country the bilateral agreement on security assurances, which is on content important, but it's also a sign because that is a 10-year tenure. We are in for the long run there, right? And this is basically what we are into. And I think Diana also mentioned it. It's basically, you know, supporting Ukraine is supporting Ukrainian security, but also European security. And if you think it through, it's also the security of the whole world, basically, right? Because if you can have an aggression without consequences, that endangers the whole world in the end. So having said that, last point maybe, is we are also thinking reconstruction together already. So it is that we are having the Ukraine Recovery Conference in mid of June in Berlin. A lot of countries are already in it. I also know Sweden is very active in that field. But so this is last point I want to mention. I leave it here. I mean, I could say a lot more things, but due to the time, I'll stop here.
Thank you very much. Yes, there is a lot to say for sure, but it was very interesting, and I think it's also interesting to. There are different aspects when it comes to public support, for example, as you mentioned, but also different, like the energy you mentioned. Sweden was much less affected, of course, by this because it didn't have any dependency on Russian gas. So there are very many different aspects, of course, on this. And just a short.
Quickly, just comment. I think even if we have these nuances within certain member states, I think. The Kremlin expected when they launched the full-scale invasion on Ukraine that it would manage to fragmentize Europe, and I think the response was exactly the opposite, because it was just amazing to see how Europe came together and has launched one sanctions package after the other. First, it's against Russia, so. I think the European Union support has two major pillars. First, it's the support for Ukraine, but then it's also the sanctions and the consequences for Russia. And I think also there was a hope in the Kremlin to weaken the transatlantic relationship, and in the contrary, it got stronger. So I think even if you have these nuances within member states, I think the overall support is just it's rock solid.
Yes, we will hopefully come back to some of these issues, but now I would like to ask you, Ambassador Gonville, about France. It's also an important major player in this and an important donor. How do you see the development in the last 2 years in the French public and the political sphere?
Well, thank you very much. And first of all, I would just like to echo what Diana said earlier and assure Andrei that we are all aware more than ever at the beginning of 2024 that Ukraine is fighting for our freedom, for the liberty of Europe. And that is what we need to keep in mind through the year. To answer your question, I would also like to prolong what Diana just said and not think so much as we start about what we are doing, but what the Kremlin regime is doing at the moment. It's always good to start by the situation of the other side before thinking about what we should do and what our strategy should be. It's a battle of wills, definitely, from day one. It's a battle of wills. And what we see is that the aggression by the Kremlin regime has intensified in recent months. It has intensified because we've had over the autumn and part of the winter a debate on Ukraine fatigue in the Western world. And it has not brought us closer to peace. It has put us much further away from peace. We've seen an intensifying level of aggressiveness by the Russians against Ukraine, of course, but also against the immediate environment of Russia and against us directly, against our interests, through manipulation of information, through cyber attacks on our territories, and through a less and less professional attitude of the Russian armed forces in other environments. For us, it's very concretely direct threats from the Russian aviation against the French aviation over the Black Sea. So they are testing the limits. They have... Alexei Navalny died. I was going to say Alexei Navalny was killed. This is a test of our will as well. This is part of the same aggressiveness that is only increasing as time goes by from the Kremlin. And they want us to feel weak. They want to weaken us. They want to think that we are disunited. They want us to think that the cause is lost. They want to impose the narrative on us. They want to impose it on our public opinion, on our journalists, on our analysts, to describe the Ukrainian army as demoralized, etc. When the reality is that this whole thing is an absolute catastrophe for Russia. And when you go in details about what they are doing with their defense industry, their economy, their demography, the population, this whole generation of Russians that Putin is sending to be killed in Ukraine, all of that is part of a catastrophe that the Kremlin regime knows perfectly well, but wants to hide from its population and from us. So we should not fall into that trap, and we should, on the contrary, since this is a battle of wills, demonstrate our determination. And as 2024 begins, this is what we're doing. President Zelensky was in Paris on the 16th of February. He was just before in Germany. He signed with us agreements on cooperation for the long run with security guarantees that France, the UK, Germany gave to Ukraine for 10 years. So we gave security guarantees for the next 10 years against the current Russian aggression and any future Russian aggression until Ukraine joins NATO. We promised more military support. We are going to send more cruise missiles to Ukraine. We're going to send more glide bombs, hundreds of glide bombs to Ukraine. We're going to send more artillery. And we are developing, indeed, schemes so that we can ramp up production of ammunition, missiles, anti-aircraft defenses, all the needs of the Ukrainian defenders. All of that to change the balance of forces and to reach the goals that the European Council has stated very clearly from day one. Russia must immediately cease its military actions. Russia must unconditionally withdraw all forces and military equipment from Ukraine. Russia must fully respect Ukraine's territorial integrity, sovereignty, and independence. And if Russia does that, we have peace. So these goals have not changed for the Europeans. our determination is intact, and we will not buy the Russian narrative. And this is the messaging of the French authorities to Europe, to the US Congress, and of course to our public opinion. And we have the same kind of debates than Boris summed up about Germany. We have the same kind of interrogation in our public opinion, but we should absolutely show determination and show the way, the only way to the defeat of the Russian aggression and to peace in Europe.
Thank you very much. Andrei, would you like to comment on any of this, since this kind of the battle of wills and the situation that were described?
What I would like to mention is that the information sphere, the information warfare goes on, and we should be prepared. I mean, all the governments, all the friendly governments of all our countries here in Europe should be prepared that the Russian Federation would exploit each and every opportunity to weaken us, sending different narratives, using social media. So it's a kind of very important sphere where we should all work together. We know that the governments are doing a lot. We know that there will be elections here in the European continent and in many other countries as well. So we should be better prepared, in the sense we should definitely intensify our cooperation and exchange ideas how to counter this challenge and this threat. When it comes to agreements and security commitments, which my country signed with 3 partners as of today, definitely they are very important. Important in its essence, and importance in sending clear messages to the Russian Federation about the commitments of these countries to support Ukraine during this most difficult times. We highly appreciate that, and we are working with all our partners here in Sweden, in the Nordic states and elsewhere, to have as more such security commitments agreements as possible, because they will contribute to our overall strengths and our all possibility and capability to continue the fight for our joint freedom, for our joint values.
Thank you. Yeah, I think, sorry, maybe we should go back to disinformation soon and discuss a bit. But I wanted to go back to you also, Etienne, on the, as you mentioned, with the ramping up of ammunition and the production of ammunition. And it has been a bit in discussion right now that France has proposed that this ammunition should be made in Europe, so to speak. And do you think Europe has the capacity, and can we produce that much that we need?
So there is a very important debate going on this at the moment, and of course this debate is impacted by the urgency of the situation on the battlefield. And our decision makers are faced with a dilemma in Europe right now. Because the US Congress has not decided on the supplemental that is supposed to buy a large part of the US ammunition production to be sent to Ukraine, there is renewed pressure on us Europeans to buy shells, in particular coming out of US factories, to send them to Ukraine. And yes, there is an urgency to send ammunitions to the front line. At the same time, we have another instruction, which is to develop ammunition production in Europe and to ramp up our own capacities so that we are able to support Ukraine in the middle run and to build a stronger Europe in the long run, to be much stronger in our defense industry. So the dilemma for us now is that if we use the European money to buy ammunition abroad, then that money will not be spent on public procurement in Europe, so that European factories can produce the same type of ammunitions. And we will not develop our capacities and capabilities, and we will not be able to support Ukraine in the middle run, because we will not have the factories installed with the money we have now. So this is the debate that our leaders have. this is an ongoing discussion. I am not going to take any side on this one and tell you what the right balance will be in the end. But there is this dilemma, and it's not simply, oh, France doesn't want to buy shell abroad for Ukraine, and France is against the Ukrainians. It's what is the best way to spend the money we have so that we can support Ukraine the best way we can in the middle run. I would add that together with Sweden, we're working hard on anti-tank weapons and on ammunition. We have factories in France and in Sweden that are working on both those items, so that we are able to better support Ukraine.
Yeah, thank you. Actually, we have a bit of a unique situation here, because all these three countries are countries that produce military equipment to a large extent, and there are not that many in Europe. Boris and Diana, do you have any opinions on this made in Europe or not, or also maybe on should the EU subsidize ammunition production? Is this kind of a way to go? We are not going to preempt the discussion, but as Etienne said, the decision will not be taken. Yeah. But just your views, if you want.
Well, indeed, thanks a lot. And as Etienne pointed out, I think it's a very important discussion that we're having right now. It's not decided yet, but we're united in the aim there. Of course, it's just on how to do it. And from our point of view, it's not mutually excluding, right? What we're discussing here. We have the short-term needs, and like Sweden and us, we have a market approach there. I mean, we should buy what is on the market in order to immediately support Ukraine with what is on the market in order to perform on the battlefield the best way possible. At the same time, we have to think about the midterm, long-term strategies there, and whatever we have on the market, put it on the market, of course, buy it. Also produce more, have new prototypes, develop our industries. I mean, that is what we are doing, what France is doing, what Sweden is doing. That's exactly the right way. And again, I think it's not mutually excluding, and we should invest, of course, because it's our strategic interest in Europe, into our European industry, defense industry here. So, and we just have to discuss what is the smartest way, I think. And when it comes to the market subsidies, I mean, we would think that the market is probably the best way to perform and work with incentives. I mean, to put the production. I mean, to give incentives to ramp up production. I mean, I leave it here. I can add more, but I want to.
Yeah, I could just add that the aim is clear, and that is to help Ukraine win the war. And of course, we need to adapt to the fact that Russia has they have gone over to war economy, which basically means that their ammunition factories and their military industry is working 3-shift. So exactly how to do that best, I leave to those decision makers in that particular field. But if I may, yes, I would like to tag back to what Boris asked earlier, or raised earlier. How do you keep public support? And what makes Sweden unique because Sweden stands out when it comes to such a broad and solid public support for Ukrainian cause. And I think there are a few factors, but I also don't think it's static in any way. So it's sort of also our task to make sure to support this developments. But I think first we have a very vivid civil society in Sweden. And we also see how many new civil society organizations that have been created in order to support Ukraine, be it Måndagsrörelsen or Onsdagsrörelsen or Blågula bilen or Operation Aid and more. And it's just I get really proud, I have to say, but to see this grassroots engagement, which creates a buy-in on another level and contacts on another, like on a personal level. So I think our vivid society is one point. Another, I think, is and which is something we try to build on also in working with the Minister for Development Cooperation and International Trade or Foreign Trade. It's to support Swedish companies that wants to enter the Ukrainian market or stay on the Ukrainian market or transfer maybe from the Russian market to the Ukrainian market. And that's also a way of creating like a stake on your a personal stake, a personal buy-in, personal ties, and a personal engagement, which I think is core then for also supporting the political aspects of the support. Then I think it's extremely important what you mentioned is to fight the Russian narrative and also sort of give a sense of meaning that this battle can be won. I mean, what we are presented with are fake news or distorted facts, and to discourage us, to sort of send us a feeling that it's hopeless, Russia is too big, too powerful, too mighty, can't be beaten and all that. And I think from the very start we have overestimated Russian capabilities and capacity, and we have underestimated Ukraine's spirit and capabilities. So, and this of course plays in, it sort of wears us out or risks that we end up thinking, oh, maybe it's not possible to win, maybe Russia will win in the end. But we really have to, with a joint effort, help fighting this narrative. Because it's, as Etienne said, it's a battle of will, it's a battle of minds, and it all starts here. So, yeah, in that way I think if we all push it that way, if we all help that way, we can also keep this broad public support, which is a prerequisite for strong political support in the end.
Yes, absolutely, very, very good points, and I think that also ties into the fact that we now have a European election coming up, because what you all mentioned is also the importance of keeping EU united. Do you see, any of you, do you see a risk? I mean, you mentioned, both of you mentioned fractions in your countries that are going, so to speak, the more pro-Russian way. Do you feel a bit fearful for the European election or still hopeful? So Boris and Etienne.
It's a tricky question for a professional diplomat because we've already entered the period before the elections and we're not supposed to make political comments. I would just say that it will be very important, and I think this is the reason why so many French leaders are speaking up these days about the importance of the support to Ukraine. It is very important to identify as we enter the election campaign phase, to identify the manipulations coming from the Kremlin regime. Because they are trying their best every day, but they will try even more as we go to the European elections, because their interest is to bring as many pro-Russian parties in the European Parliament, not only to weaken the support to Ukraine, but just to weaken us as the European Union. And they have already started to do that. So again, not making political comments, but it will be very important to see who is speaking for the Kremlin in this campaign.
Yes, I'm sorry, I'm not going to put you on a political spot, so maybe just the trends. Yes,
yeah. I mean, Etienne perfectly summed it up. Just to add, it's on the one hand the Russian disinformation that we have and other actors, state actors that are trying to influence with the same aim, also beyond Ukraine there. I mean, just putting stress on our democratic and political system, so everything that divides us, not only Ukraine, but any other subject, will be exploited by disinformation. So it's very important to educate our public about it. And just to add a number to it, or maybe not a number, but an observation in Germany, for example, less and less people inform themselves with like the relevant media as we used to. Like in the good old days, we had these paper newspapers where you would look in, and now you have good media online. But a lot of people just go to social media, and the social media, we have all those echo chambers and everything we know about, but we have to really have this fight of the narratives in order to have an informed discussion in the end that can lead to a democratic outcome.
Yes, absolutely. Moving then to a bit the political path forward. I mean, the European Commission's President von der Leyen has said many times that Ukraine belongs in the EU and is part of the European family. And we have also seen the official green light to go ahead with the negotiations for accession of Ukraine. How do you see this process now starting? If I start with you, Andrei, and then all of you will be asked to chip in.
Firstly, once again, we are profoundly grateful to all EU leaders for making this strong political decisions in support of Ukraine, and which is existential for us, and not only for the country itself, but for Ukrainian people, to continue to be highly motivated in this war for freedom and dignity. When it comes to the next steps, definitely the position of my government is like this: we are ready to proceed with our reforms, with all our commitments as fast as we can. So we would be ready to reflect, to respond to proposals by European Commission when it comes to the shaping of the framework of future negotiations as soon as possible. So we are on this track, and we are fully committed to deliver.
Thank you. The three countries you're representing, how do you see this process and the wish? Please.
Yeah, well, I only see it's so fantastic to see what progress we made on the European path that Ukraine made. And I think this is yet another example of how Russia's strategy backfired. They wanted to weaken us. Instead, we have this historic opportunity that Ukraine really seized and ran with it. And now if you look at the speed of in 2 years' time, we now have a situation where Ukraine can start membership talks. So we will continue to support Ukraine's EU accession, and we do think it will make an effective contribution to peace, stability and prosperity in Europe, because Ukraine belongs in Europe.
Etienne?
No, absolutely. I would just echo what Diana said. It's amazing the speed at which this process has evolved. With the candidate status in June 2022 and with the decision to open accession talks in December 2023, despite the fact that Ukraine was under attack. So this has progressed very quickly. Now, of course, EU accession does not happen overnight, so it's the beginning of a process. But the question of whether Ukraine is outside the EU or inside the EU is no longer relevant. It's definitely part of the European family. And we are taking all measures possible to integrate Ukraine in the future. I would also add that the debate on the participation of Ukraine in NATO has also evolved tremendously. Now there are no type of the process is extremely different within the NATO organization, but we now talk openly about it as a perspective. And as I said, when President Zelensky was in Paris, we offered security guarantees until the time Ukraine is protected by NATO. I will also add that other things evolve very quickly. With Sweden and Finland joining NATO, this is also amazing. And this is another element that should convince us that Russia is suffering a strategic defeat. And that the reality is the strategic defeat of Russia already happening.
Thank you. Boris.
So most of the things have been said, but not by everybody yet. So just to add some German color to it, I mean, we of course also support very wholeheartedly the membership of the EU. I mean, it belongs to Europe and the European Union. Just to add some examples, I mean, with the 33 negotiation chapters that are happening, Germany is supporting in at least 18 in order to help you advance there, right? Another aspect is that we as Germany, we see ourselves, that our support comes as in the form of advice, so to say. So we listen to the Ukrainians, right? We have a very good relationship. If there's something that we see, we talk about it, we discuss it, that has to be improved. Last but not least, we also see our role as an advocate in the European Union. Maybe to allude to something that can meet at times, that we invite a European partner to get a coffee at the right time at a meeting, right? So this is one way to push things forward. And another thing, as André mentioned, I wanted to stress also that we're very impressed by the reforms that you are doing right now, you know, under the circumstances. So this is an incredible achievement. So just to stress that again. And the last point, as a German being German, I would take the enlargement debate as a whole. I would like to make one point that pointing to the European Council decision in December 23, that we say enlargement is one thing and it's important, but it has to be parallel with reform. So in order to be an effective player on the geopolitical scene, we also have to reform ourselves. Not only Ukraine has to do it, but in order to be prepared for a European Union of 30 plus, we have to get our structures straight too. So just to make that point too at this point here.
That was exactly my next question, so thank you.
Welcome.
Just asking, because now we say, yes, it's all positive, but what does it actually mean for the existing 27 member states? Are we prepared? Are we willing to go the extra mile that it actually means to reform internally? And do you have any reflections on that? Because as Boris said, we are not talking only about Ukraine, we are talking about Western Balkans, so we might be EU 30 plus. So do you have any reflections on what it means for the EU internally?
Well, first of all, as I said, this process is not going to happen overnight. And this is often something that is not well understood when people say, the Ukrainian agriculture is going to sink the rest of the European agriculture. It's not that. It's a process. We will discuss all those things during the process and we will find the right balance. The same is true for the evolution of the European Union. Of course, it needs to evolve. An EU at 27 will not be the same when it is with 35 maybe member states. So this reflection, this thinking has started. It was a big theme under the French and then the Czech and Swedish presidencies of the Council of the European Union. We need to reflect on our institutions, on our organization, and to adapt them to the new realities of the future. So this process has started, it's going on, and anyway, it's not going to happen overnight, but we should work on it.
Diana?
I rather comment on everything we do to support Ukraine and Moldova to reform. And as was mentioned previously, I mean, what Ukraine has done, despite the difficult circumstances, is just mind-blowing. And it's real effort. And we continue to support Ukraine specifically then in its EU integration process. And while Ukraine will be busy doing all the necessary reforms, the European Union will be busy preparing for the necessary changes. And then I'm sure this will come together neatly and nicely in due time. I wanted to also mention, because we haven't talked about Moldova and other countries in the neighborhood that is also under increased pressure because of the war and because of Russia's aggressive behavior on the international stage. But Moldova has also seized this opportunity and managed to have a same decision was taken for Moldova in December on accession talks, and we see it extremely important from our point of view to also support Moldova, and there we also focus on the Moldova's EU reform track.
Yes, Boris.
Yeah, maybe just to add a little bit on the general reform discussion. As I said, we think it's a parallel process, right? I mean, it was decided, and one of the important things is that national vetoes are minimized. You know, I mean, have the structures on the qualified majority votes, for example, revised. Always having also, of course, a mechanism to safeguard national interest. That's, of course, the main reason why people are reluctant sometimes. So we need to have the proper mechanism here. But this is, from our point of view, of course, very, very interesting, and a lot can be achieved also without treaty change already. So, you know, there's a lot of things that we can do. We have a non-paper with Slovenia on the qualified majority. Sweden co-sponsored it, so that's a good thing. It's a good basis for discussion. And going beyond that, we also have to look at the institutional setup, right? The Commission, the Council, and all the procedures that are behind it. I don't want to go into detail. It's an own discussion, an own event, but just maybe to add that from my point of view. Thanks.
Perfect, thank you. Andre, we are all hoping that we will not stand here next year and have this discussion again. How do you foresee the near future, and what would you like to be the next step from the European Union, if you could kind of see the next coming months?
Definitely, I cannot see what exactly happens in a year time. Definitely, all Ukrainians wish that by the next year, by this date, next year, we would have already won the war. But what I'm sure about, that in a year time, we will be engaged in hard work. Hard work to discuss what can be done more to support Ukraine, be it reconstruction efforts, be it the spheres to prioritize with, or be it another discussion on how to support Ukraine militarily to survive this war. So we should be prepared for hard work ahead of us. We in Ukraine, and I'm more than confident, the Europeans and the European Union that has shown its strengths during the last 2 years. We will have a lot of things to discuss next year, this date, or well, let's say in 2 years' time. Because this war, it has, once again, I've mentioned this before, it has brought a lot of destruction to Ukraine. So a lot of things to do, and we should be prepared for that.
Thank you. Diana, what do you think are the most important next steps for Sweden and for the EU to support Ukraine?
We will continue to do our work in supporting Ukraine. As I said, it's a whole of government approach. So we will continue to provide support in the development sphere, militarily, politically, judicially, financially, etc. And then we will do our part and more if needed to make sure that the EU stays united and that the transatlantic link is solid. And as we hope, of course, for a decision on Sweden's NATO accession in the near future. And with that, we'll do our part to make NATO stronger as well, which I think is a very important part in this overall equation. Thank you.
Thank you. Same question to you.
Well, it's obviously very difficult to discuss what will happen in 1 year from the comfort of this room, when what we are speaking about is people dying in trenches, civilian sufferings, towns being destroyed, a maddening level of violence happening in Europe. And of course, what we hope in 1 year is that Ukraine will be at peace, that no one will die anymore, and no one will be wounded anymore for an absurd reason that exists only in the mind of the Kremlin regime. But unfortunately, war is not about hope, it's very much about uncertainty. And to face that uncertainty, we need clear and determined strategies. And our strategy now is indeed, as Dan underlined, a strategy for the long run. It should not be a strategy for the short run, hoping that things will get well. It should be a strategy for the long run. A long-term support to Ukraine, a long-term determination so that the thinking evolves in Moscow.
Thank you. Boris.
Thank you. Again, always hard to be the last speaker. But I would also say, I mean, I have to admit, I'm an optimist, you know, but we always have to remind ourselves that optimism is not the right category to analyze a conflict like this. So I think this is what was said before, right? I mean, we have to remain unity. We have to get the facts straight in the sense of being aware of the disinformation campaign that is running against us from different sides, and then build up exactly on what was said before, right? Having our strategies, get our act together with delivering arms, ramping up our weapons production and everything else that is needed, you know, humanitarian support. It was mentioned, it was the reconstruction, recovery, everything. So, I mean, lots in front of us, but we can do it.
Thank you, and I apologize for always going in this
No,
direction.
no,
You did a great
Actually, I'm
job.
happy about it, thanks. So the smart things were said before.
With that, I would like to greatly thank the panel for being here today and discussing this very, very important issue, and thank the audience and those of you watching online. And I hope to see many of you showing your support also tomorrow at Sergels Torg. And a big applause for the panel, please.
And for moderator.
Thank you.